The Ukrainian counteroffensive is in full swing, and Russia is determined to stop it in its tracks. This is how. For over a month now, Ukraine's been engaged in shaping operations in anticipation of a major offensive. Russia's been fully aware of Ukraine's upcoming offensive operation and has made good use of its time in preparation. Knowing the range of HIMARS, Russia has widely dispersed its stockpiles of equipment and ammunition, moving larger stockpiles back and out of the range of the 50-mile rocket artillery. However, Russia was blindsided by a surprise move from the British. Since the war started, Ukraine has been asking for three specific things: tanks, fighter jets, and long-range precision attack munitions like the U.S. ATACMS. It got part of its wish fulfilled with the receipt of multiple HIMARS batteries, which caught the Russians by surprise last summer and decimated their logistics, setting the stage for one of the most stunningly successful counterattacks in modern military history. Yet, the U.S. kept denying the requests for the longer-ranged ATACMS, which Ukraine could use to launch strikes deep into the Russian rear, even as far as the Kerch Bridge, a vital supply route for Russian occupation forces in Crimea and the south of Ukraine. The refusals have persisted for over a year, with various justifications given, such as the fear of imaginary escalation from a Russia utterly spent in combat with Ukraine. This is why in early May, Russia was completely blindsided by a series of precision attacks deep in its rear. Just minutes after they were striking Russian supply depots, vehicle assembly points, and command posts, Britain revealed to the world that they were going to supply Ukraine with the Storm Shadow cruise missile. And oops, they already did, and Ukraine had more already in country. The move was calculated to allow Ukraine to make maximum use of the missile in a surprise round of attacks, before Russia could adjust its air defenses to deal with this new threat. Russia, which has been historically deeply apathetic during this war, was completely surprised and unprepared. Storm Shadow strikes continue to this day, but as of the second week of June, the ground offensive has at last officially begun. Ukraine currently is employing lighter forces to attack Russian lines across multiple vectors, in a classic reconnaissance and force probe of enemy defenses. The Ukrainians are looking for the weak spots in Russia's defenses before committing overwhelming firepower. However, the probing attacks also put Russian mobile reserves on the back foot, as it's impossible to tell from where the real attack will finally come. Currently, it's estimated that Ukraine has committed only half of its reserves to the offensive, waiting for a moment where it can bring to bear the rest of its forces in one massive, overwhelming push. But Russia has its own plans, and some of them are actually competent for a change. To be fair, being on the defense is easy, especially when your army is largely made up of conscripts with only a few months of experience. Russian regular forces have been thoroughly bled, with many of its strongest and most elite units rendered combat ineffective by a year of fighting. Others have been broken up and reassigned piecemeal units largely staffed by conscripts in an attempt to embed experienced and well-trained veterans amidst completely unprepared raw conscripts. The strategy is not without merit, but it does leave Russia short on elite offensive formations capable of carrying out the very hard task of mobile assaults. The Russia of today is a far weaker force, fundamentally and materially, than the Russia that entered Ukraine in February of last year. While it physically has more troops in the country than it did when the war began, it has far less well-trained units ready for complex military operations than it did in February 2022. With Russia sending experienced instructors into combat, it doesn't look like there's much of a chance of them fielding professional large-scale formations anytime soon either. And it's not just the infantry and tankers that are in trouble, it's the Russian aerospace forces too. Russian doctrine dictates that the most experienced pilots get the most dangerous missions. Combat losses throughout the war have forced Russia to deploy veteran instructors from training programs in the motherland to frontline duty. And the missions that they must undertake now are more dangerous than ever given the proliferation of Western air defenses. These missions become more and more dangerous when your own air defenses start blowing you out of the sky. On May 13th, Russia lost a Su-34, Su-35, and two Mi-8 helicopters equipped for electronic warfare to its own air defenses and over its own territory. This special strike team, consisting of two helicopters modified to carry electronic warfare equipment, was likely on its way to destroy advanced Western air defenses like American Patriots sent to Ukraine, and instead never even crossed their own border. According to reports, all air crews were killed, a catastrophic loss of experienced aviators for Russia at a time where it's already facing a significant lack of combat pilots. Russia's thus largely relying on meat and a whole lot of artillery to blunt the Ukrainian counterattack. With both sides facing a shell shortage, Russia was forced to limit offensive operations in the spring as it built a reserve specially dedicated to defeating the Ukrainian counterattack. This has caused significant friction with groups like Yevgeny Prigozhin's Wagner Group, who accused the Russian Ministry of Defense of purposefully sabotaging Wagner by denying them ammunition. There may have been some truth to that, but the cold hard calculus is that Russia simply did not have enough ammo to prepare for the summer attack and carry out continued offenses. A key part of defeating the Ukrainian offensive is the extensive line of fortifications and trenches that Russia has dug. Traditional Russian defensive doctrine calls for the creation of multiple defensive lines stretching as much as 8 to 10 kilometers deep. In most places, Russia has supplemented regular trenches with special tank obstacles of two different kinds: Dragon's Teeth and anti-tank trenches. The first, Dragon's Teeth, are giant pyramid-shaped concrete pillars that are meant to disrupt a tank's ability to cross the terrain. When used correctly, they can be a major impediment to armored vehicles, but we've had evidence that Russia is not in fact using them correctly. During the early spring, videos leaked online of Ukrainian tanks crossing over Dragon's Teeth obstacles or simply pushing them out of the way. Tanks are pretty surprisingly mobile pieces of equipment, so it's not necessarily a surprise that the Ukrainians would be able to maneuver over these obstacles. What is surprising is that these tanks were apparently free to do so. No defensive obstacle is effective all on its own, and while Dragon's Teeth may not stop all armored vehicles, they do significantly slow them down. This is where supporting elements like friendly tanks, anti-tank teams, aircraft, or artillery are meant to come into play, destroying the vulnerable attacking tanks. As usual though, Russia proved too uncoordinated to engage these penetrations, though it should not be expected that the same would happen in a massive offensive operation. Dragon's Teeth, however, are also supposed to be partially buried into the ground in order to prevent engineering vehicles or regular tanks from simply pushing them aside. This was not the case in at least some of the areas of the front where Ukrainian tanks simply pushed their way through the obstacles, or where the Dragon's Teeth were seen deployed on top of a concrete road. The next obstacle Ukraine must overcome are extensive minefields laid out in preparation of the coming offensive by Russian troops. It's now estimated that Ukraine's east could be the most mined place on Earth, second only perhaps to the DMZ that separates North and South Korea. Significant effort has been made by Western militaries to equip Ukraine to deal with these mines, with the donation of multiple engineering vehicles and specialized plows meant to cut a path through the earth and detonate any mines in the way. The U.S. even gave Ukraine specialized vehicles equipped with the Miklik mine-clearing line charge. These armored vehicles shoot out a rocket-propelled mine-clearing line that lands on the ground and detonates, clearing a path for advancing vehicles and infantry. However, Miklik isn't always effective against mines buried deeper in the earth, and even anti-mine plows pushed along by armored vehicles can't always dig deep enough to detonate them either. And then there's the simple density of mines. Russia has inherited a massive stockpile of millions of them from the Soviet Union and put them to great use. The Ukrainians found out just how dense Russian minefields can be in the Battle of Mala Tokmachka, where a Ukrainian offensive was forced to retreat after failing to penetrate the Russian minefields. Adding to the troubling mix are copious amounts of Russian artillery, which can be devastating when employed against an offensive bogged down in thick minefields. This is exactly what happened in Mala Tokmachka, where the second assault, consisting of 11 armored vehicles, was dispatched in the wake of the first failed assault, which had been stopped by mines. In the end, this was only a probing attack, but Ukraine still lost 2 engineering vehicles, including one of its rare Leopard tanks, and 4 armored vehicles, some of them being American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Normally, aviation or precision counter-battery fire would be used to suppress enemy artillery during an assault, but Ukraine has been unable to fly close to the front lines for most of the war. Its precision artillery capabilities are also light on the ground, and what units it does have can't be everywhere at once. Russia, on the other hand, has made the surprising move of officially moving its aviation closer to the front. Famously, the Russian aerospace forces have woefully underperformed during the course of this war, and it's hard to blame them when their own air defenses have shot down nearly as many of their aircraft as the Ukrainians have. The Russians have also proven how bad their air power doctrine is, with events such as the attacks in Chernobyl in March of 2022, when Ukrainian artillery shelled parked Russian helicopters over a dozen times, with the Russians returning the helicopters and adding new ones after each attack. This sounds like insanity, but Russian doctrine states that air support must be within a 15-minute response time of frontline troops. That doctrine, however, was written with little consideration for precision long-range fire. After disasters like Chernobyl and the proliferation of Western man-portable air defense weapons, Russia's pulled its air force way back from the front, mostly relegating it to low-precision, low-altitude attack runs or lobbing missiles at civilians from hundreds of kilometers away. Now this is changing, with Russian aircraft reportedly moving into the east of Ukraine from bases in Russia to better support the front. We already have confirmation of more Western tank and armored vehicles lost to Russian air attack, highlighting a very crippling vulnerability of Ukrainian armed forces: the lack of air support for frontline forces. While advanced Western defenses have enjoyed an interception rate as high as 90 to 95% in areas like Kyiv, they can't be everywhere at once, and few of them are near the front. This is why Ukraine has been getting desperate, calling for Western fighters such as the F-16, and it seems like it's finally getting them, with confirmation that Ukrainian pilots are already entering training in various Western countries. To counter the F-16, though, Russia has turned once more to directly targeting Western audiences with propaganda messages meant to terrify or demoralize the West from their continued support. Russia knows that the West expects to see big results from the investment of hundreds of armored vehicles sent to Ukraine so far, which is why it exploits every single destroyed Leopard tank or American Bradley IFV to maximum extent. Early in the counteroffensive, a column of Leopards supported by Bradley IFVs was ambushed by Russian artillery. The column was operating under very poor doctrine, with the vehicles closely bunched together, making them easy prey. Details remain sketchy, but multiple vehicles were either destroyed or damaged so bad they had to be abandoned. Later, an attack along the same axis would be successful, allowing Ukraine to tow the vehicles back into the rear areas for repair, but Russia was already making full propaganda use of the Ukrainian blunder. By using multiple angles of the same attack, Russia painted a picture of a dozen or more Leopard 2s and Bradleys having been destroyed. Sadly, many in the West believed this to be the case, which is why fighting Russian disinformation is so important. The truth is that Western vehicles are not invulnerable and were always going to be damaged or destroyed in fierce fighting, especially because Ukraine cannot make use of them in the same way the West can in overwhelming combined arms maneuvers. The Kremlin has exploited this, spreading every piece of video and photo evidence it has of destroyed Western Leopards, Bradleys, and more to paint a picture indicating the futility of continuing to supply Ukraine. Famously, Russia even resorted to using its own destroyed tank as proof of a Leopard 2 kill, despite one of the insignias found in the wreckage and displayed in the propaganda video clearly belonging to a Russian army unit. The fact that Ukraine is still in a strict media blackout does not help it fight the Russian narrative. Ukraine, which is typically dominating the media battlefield, has been forced to cede the battle for the minds of the people to Russia in order to keep ongoing operations secret. This means we're getting very little footage of destroyed Russian vehicles and a whole lot of destroyed Ukrainian vehicles, despite it being obvious by the constant, slow but steady gains across the front that Ukraine is pushing the Russians back all across the Eastern Front. Russia's hope is that it can defeat Western equipment before it even gets to Ukraine by targeting you, the Western observer. By convincing you that it's a futile waste of money to send more expensive kit to Ukraine, Russia hopes that you'll influence your politicians into stopping further shipments. The strategy is not without merit, with multiple American Republican presidential candidates campaigning on a promise to end support for Ukraine altogether. Republican-led nominee and federal criminal defendant Donald Trump has promised that he would stop support for Ukraine upon taking office, viewing the war as a territorial affair and a waste of U.S. taxpayer money. Vladimir Putin's also attempted to use nuclear intimidation to rattle the West into ceasing support for Ukraine. Russia and Belarus have signed an agreement to allow for the basing of Russian nuclear weapons inside Belarus itself, the first time in over 2 decades that Russia has had a nuclear component outside of its own borders. The move is hugely symbolic, as it has little strategic benefit. In fact, it's a strategic liability given the civil unrest inside of Belarus and the fact that these weapons are now even closer to quick response precision NATO strike capabilities. But it is a calculated move meant to intimidate the West by raising the specter of nuclear war, something Vladimir Putin knows is ridiculous but is counting on an uninformed Western audience to be fearful of. It might even be working, with the recent transfer of the weapons making headlines in once more putting the words nuclear war on the lips of hundreds of millions of Westerners. Yet, it is a pointless move. These nukes were just as deadly inside of Russia as they are inside Belarus. It's a pathetic attempt at nuclear blackmail, and it seems the West isn't really buying it. That's why Russia needs kinetic solutions to its Western tank problem. Over the winter, as it became clear Ukraine would receive large amounts of Western tanks, Russia set about creating special task forces meant to find and destroy these tanks. Knowing it would cause a morale crisis in the West, destroying Western armored vehicles became a top priority. But the truth is that these vehicles also present a significant challenge to Russian forces who are outgunned and equipped with inferior vehicles of their own. and Ukraine, it seems, is starting to take full advantage of superior Western capabilities, taking a page right out of the US playbook. There are reports that Ukraine's now beginning a night attack campaign, leveraging the advantage that Western tanks and IFVs have in thermal and night vision sights, as well as fire control systems. Supplied with Western night vision, its soldiers now enjoy an advantage that the Russians largely lack, who, outside of very specialized elite formations, typically have one set of night vision for every 10 soldiers. America has long ruled the night thanks to its technological superiority, and now Ukraine is using Western gear to enjoy the same advantage. As of June 15th, it's far too early to tell how effective these night attacks are, but if Ukraine uses forces specially trained in the West for these operations in large numbers, Russia could be in serious trouble. This war is ultimately a marathon, though not a sprint, and even if the Ukrainian offensive fails completely, both sides have the forces to continue fighting for a long time. As long as Western support holds, Ukraine will emerge victorious as Russia faces combined arms economic might of the entire West and a significant number of Asian allies. At the end of the day, it was Russia who invaded Ukraine, and Russia who has carried out a campaign of war crimes against Ukrainian civilians, and it's Russia who must be handed a defeat so complete it can never again pose a threat to Europe or beyond. Now do your part and watch deadly weapons US is sending to Ukraine, or click this other video instead.